I'm assuming you've already watched the second season of the Eccentric Family, or you don't mind spoilers and you want to figure out or learn what is the deal with this. Why should you watch it? And I'm going to talk about a few things that I find particularly remarkable about the second season of the Eccentric Family because I think they do some really smart things. And first off, I want to talk about Ben 10 and how they really evolve that character. Ben 10 is clearly the antagonist of season one. She's the one really who is coordinating all of the bad stuff happening in season one, but really from behind the scenes because she has this giant chip on her shoulder. She regrets at some level the position she's been put in, that she is this kept woman and that there's just nowhere for her to go, that she's kind of trapped here. And so she uses her power and influence to cause ruckus that will entertain her. And so we see her suddenly come up against somebody who challenges that. I love that Nadaime is this very imperious character. It feels a lot like Howl from Howl's Moving Castle, and I wonder if that wasn't an inspiration on some level. I don't know when the original novels were written, but Nadaime really feels like this perfect counterpoint to Benton because he's not the opposite of her, but he is the one who does not fly into that cold rage. He is the one who is very controlled at all times. He can get angry, he can get upset, but he doesn't let his powers go out of control. He doesn't let his anger get the better of him, which definitely happens with Benton. That's why everyone's afraid of Benton. So I love how, and I think it's really fascinating that they create this character that is, in some ways, Benton's mirror. Many similar things about them, but Benton's one big flaw that keeps everyone away from her, Nadaime does not have it all, but he does have this very different kind of a rage. And I also found it really cool that that really became something that challenged Benton. That suddenly she couldn't just lord it over everybody. That here's somebody who just would not kowtow to her at all. And all of her normal tricks did not work whatsoever. She could not get through to him. To the point where, by the end, like, she fails. She loses to Nadaime completely. And by the end of that, you see how she definitely looks humbled at the end. I think it's really, really interesting. And she gets there by going to hell. This is, oh my gosh, when is the last time you saw a show really go there, right? Really try to represent some version of hell. And obviously this is a over-the-top kind of artistic, stylized version of hell. And for what it's worth, by the way, that painting is actually a real painting. There's a whole legend around that actual painted screen painting done by Hokusai, I believe, or Hokusai's daughter. And I find it really interesting that they not only have a character go to hell, that is where Benton kind of finds herself again by fighting, by showing off her martial ability, despite the fact that it turns out that's completely worthless, right? It doesn't help her at all in fighting Daime. But it's fascinating to see this character who is all about political control. She is a character who manipulates. And the only way she can find her center is by punching and kicking things and throwing them around. Really, really fascinating insight to that character, which I think was very revelatory when you see that in the show, that, Benton's in her element when she's physically fighting. That's fascinating. Not to mention the fact that all of the animation in that is just incredibly interesting to me. How they represent those characters, the amount of movement, the amount of action, those felt like movie sequences often in Hell. There's just so many frames of animation being thrown at you. And it really helps to sell this environment as new and different, as someplace where the rules are changed. And I love that as a result, you're kind of concerned about that, but then you see Isaburo using his same old tricks to survive in that environment. It's a wonderful juxtaposition of this is very new, but Isaburo's always got a trick up his sleeve, which is pretty cool. And then they kill a guy, but not really. And this is where I started having some issues with season 2. This is really my first issue with season 2. I was totally on board until we get our main villain hoisted on his own petard. And it's what's so wonderful about that sequence for me is that this has been the villain for the past, one of the main villains, for the past like season and a half. And one of his own schemes backfires. And that's what gets him killed. It was so perfectly poetic. And they so effectively paced that, where it's a surprise in terms of how, that sequence of him getting shot just kind of comes out of nowhere. And then he runs off and they run after him. And just how all that flows, I thought was really effective, of kind of coming out of nowhere. But then it builds and builds, and you're like, wow, he's shot. Like, what's going to happen here? And then you see him starting to bleed out. And then to have Kaisei come in and suddenly, like, take over from Yasaburo, being like, okay, this is what's happened. I'm going to do this. And can I have a moment with my father's dead corpse? Like, that's pretty dark stuff. And it's why I was frustrated when he came back, because... okay, this is a show about trickery and reversals, but it has not established that it is about those sorts of high stakes, high scales reversals. People coming back from the dead, or tricking people to think that they were dead. That to me was a level that they had not established was standard for this kind of a story. Felt a bit like a Deus Ex Machina, frankly. So I wasn't too thrilled with that switch up, but then again, that's just, it's writing. Sometimes people make choices and it's kind of not where you'd want to go, but okay, fair enough. One thing the show did do that I really appreciated was give something for each of the brothers to do, which you did get in season 1. And I love that in season 2, it's Yajiro, the shiftless son, the one who doesn't want to get involved, who is trying to get involved as little as possible. He's the one who actually uncovers the conspiracy. And importantly, when he does, he immediately returns to inform people, right? It's not just, oh my gosh, this happened, what should I do? He takes action immediately, which I think totally makes sense for where that character has evolved. He's still constitutionally not going to be in the thick of things all the time, right? He wants to be in the background, but he is no longer going to be a completely passive character. So I thought there was a great evolution of that character and a great plot twist. I was also surprised to really appreciate the stuff between Gyokiran and Yaichiro, the oldest brother, the two that get engaged. Those romantic storylines can often feel a little bit off. They can feel forced. And I really bought into their relationship. I felt like these are two people who do clearly like each other, like they like, each other's company, but they don't have that a very lovey-dovey personality. And so folks kind of have to push them together. But they do feel right for each other. And I love how not only do we get that awkwardness throughout the show, we see as the show is climaxing, them working together very intentionally and without thought. In that sense, by that I mean those sound like contradictions. That when there's a choice to be made, they would rather work together. That sort of intentionality, but they're not worrying about that, right? They're not spending a lot of time thinking through all the possibilities about whether they should or shouldn't work together. No, we're gonna work together. That's the default, and I thought that was a really neat. Again, evolution of those characters, where Yaichiro in season 1 is this very thoughtful, very serious character, and somebody who deliberates a lot, and then can kind of fly into rages and become a tiger. And seeing him suddenly in this different scenario where he has to work through his feelings for this girl, really showed us an interesting side of him that didn't feel out of place. They integrated that into that very sort of thoughtful personality, but it softened him, and I think makes him a much more relatable character than he was in season one. I also really appreciated that Yashiro, the little kid, becomes this little inventor kid with the goggles and all that. That suddenly he loves fiddling around with stuff because in season one he is clearly the object of protection, right? Everyone's kind of trying to keep him safe, and that made him kind of this very passive character. Not passive in the sense of his personality, but in terms of his role in the story, right? There wasn't a lot for him to do, and because he was kind of a scaredy cat or scaredy tanuki, there's a lot of just kind of him being out of the way or people trying to protect him, which is why I love the ending of season one, was kind of him finally doing something, having some courage. And so one thing one could obviously do in this, which would be really annoying, would be to just repeat that, to have him, go back into passivity or be courageous all the time. That just, no. So instead, they make him curious about throwing things together and kind of building stuff and making stuff. And so having that kind of inventor tweak to his character gives him not only a role in the story, but a role in the story that adds drama. He can now get in trouble, right? He can now create things that are problematic for people or that help other people, but now they have to figure out what this thing is and relate to it. So it's a really, I thought, brilliant way of bringing that character into the story and giving them a reason to be involved in the story. And then let's go through all the brothers. I did not realize how much I would appreciate seeing Yasaburo and Kaisei's relationship actually progress and see them grow together. That by the end of that season 2, they really feel like, okay, yeah, they may actually get together. Like, they may actually find a way to make this relationship work. And I love the fact that they grew there. It wasn't that, like, they suddenly turned a corner and they were all lovey-dovey. They still don't see eye to eye on a lot of things. And you can see there's a lot of friction between the two, but they get each other. And that's why I buy that relationship, because they establish that these are two very different characters with different personalities and different outlooks on life. Kaisei is not only protective of her family, she's very active in doing so. She does so kind of behind the scenes, but she's always looking out for things, always watching things, always trying to make sure everything's working. Yasaburo is also very active, but he is very visibly active. He's going to different people and making sure things are working. So there's that complementary thing there. But Kaisei is very fiery, right? She has this very volatile personality, where Yasaburo is just so much more laid back. So you can tell how, if they really get together, they could probably make that work, because fundamentally they have their values are very similar, right? They care about their family, they care about protecting the people that they care about, and that just makes them very relatable, and you can see why they would be on the same page about a lot of things. Their personalities might not match, but that's okay, right? Opposites attract. So I thought that was really interesting that they established in season one that they are on very much opposite poles. They really don't like each other much in season one, because of this history that they never explain until season two. And it's another really impressive thing to me about this whole plot line, is that I found that strange and I found it odd in season one, their relationship. That they, she won't ever like see Yasaburo, and there's this, they're always arguing, and then you discover in season two, oh, that's why, right? By being pledged to each other, that really freaks him out, and so he can't, stay transformed. It's a really interesting evolution on that storyline, which again I think makes sense, and just feels very sweet. It feels very lovely to have these characters find a way to appreciate each other and to see where each other's coming from, which is really cool. I do have one other little complaint. It goes back to what I was talking about earlier about the villain. I do find it a little bit disappointing that we have the same villain for basically 2 seasons. The same ultimate villain, the uncle. And certainly Benten is was the antagonist there, and the Daime is kind of not really an antagonist in this time, but just a really the impetus for a lot of the stuff that's going on. And I don't know. The problem with the uncle is that he is such a mustache twirling villain. He's just kind of evil, and it's apparently unredeemably evil, which just did not feel like a very interesting character choice for a villain. Again, fine for season one because there's so much going on and you're learning about all these different characters. And so as you know, as a villain there, because we're still understanding all the rules, you don't necessarily want to spend a large amount of the season kind of establishing the motivation of your villain. Hayao Miyazaki's actually talked about this, that it takes so much time to establish a villain, and their motivations and why they're doing their stuff, that it's easier to just make them Nazis. So the uncle becomes kind of this Nazi villain, and it kind of robbed season two. No, it didn't rob season two, but it drained season two of a little bit of its vitality by making the villain this, Snidely Whiplash kind of a character. Not that overt, but still just, okay, I guess we just don't like him. Like, I guess he does what he does because he's just selfish and he's basically evil. So that was a bit disappointing, but I feel bad. Like I said in the introduction video, I feel bad complaining about this season because it does so many things so well. The characters get evolved, they go places without it feeling like we got to get bigger this time. I'm just really impressed with this season of the Eccentric Family, excuse me. And I do feel like I wish we were getting more, but I don't think we will because we've adapted all of it. So yeah. Ugh.